Excellencies, distinguished participants, I hereby declare open the 15th meeting of the 61st session of the Human Rights Council. We will continue the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief. We continue with the list of speakers. I now give the floor to International Association for Religious Freedom, intervention by video.
President, the International Association for Religious Freedom welcomes Special Rapporteur Ghanea's report on freedom of religion and honouring the deceased. We particularly appreciate paragraph 4, which highlights the barriers indigenous peoples face in accessing burial lands to honour their ancestors. In many states, protections for burial sites are conditioned on government action or apply only to publicly managed lands. This leaves a significant regulatory gap when such sites fall within privately owned or governed land. Without national frameworks extending to these contexts, private property mechanisms can effectively sever indigenous communities from their ancestral heritage. As an illustrative example, at the Kaneohe Heiau site in Hawaii, native Hawaiian practitioners face profound barriers enforced by private residential governance when seeking to access and care for their iwi kupuna, their ancestral remains. We note that the full scale of this problem remains largely undocumented, and we encourage states to undertake systematic assessments of sacred and burial sites affected by private land governance as a necessary first step towards effective frameworks that balance property rights with the fundamental right to manifest religion and care for the deceased. Special Rapporteur, what concrete legislative or policy best practices have proven effective in enabling states to reconcile private land governance with the protection of indigenous peoples' rights to access and care for sacred and burial sites? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to World Evangelical Alliance.
Mr. Vice President, the World Evangelical Alliance welcomes the Special Rapporteur's important report on how freedom of religion or belief relates to death and honouring the deceased. At moments of profound vulnerability, the ability to bury loved ones according to deeply held religious convictions is integral to human dignity. Denial of funeral rites consistent with one's faith, or obstruction, intimidation, or coercion in carrying them out constitutes a serious violation of freedom of religion or belief and contradicts international human rights law. We commend the Special Rapporteur for examining diverse religious traditions and national contexts. In our submission, we raised concerns about developments in India, where some families have reportedly been compelled to transport bodies long distances, leave loved ones unburied for extended periods, or undergo coerced reconversion rituals before burial could proceed. In certain instances, violence, police inaction, and even exhumations have compounded the suffering of grieving families. We strongly urge states to implement the report's recommendations, to consult religious communities in shaping burial policies, ensure equitable access to burial space for all faith groups, and protect families from violence and intimidation during funeral rites. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of European Centre for Law and Justice.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Madam Rapporteur, I have come here to alert you and to request your assistance. I am a nun of the Congregation of the Little Sisters of the Poor, and I'm speaking on behalf of the French Catholic congregations which have founded and administer hospitals and retirement homes. Our mission is to take care of the poor, older persons, the ill, persons living with disabilities, and the most vulnerable. Now, there's a law currently under discussion in France providing for the legalization of euthanasia according to a permissive, rapid, and repressive procedure. It also stipulates that all religious establishments are forced to accept the practice of euthanasia within their their establishments practiced on their patients and residents. It even provides for sentencing us to 2 years of prison and 30,000 euros of fines if we refuse euthanasia or assisted suicide. Any person wishing to convince a family member not to resort to euthanasia risks the same sentence. We wish to continue to take in, care for, and accompany life to its natural end with gentleness and compassion. We wish to alleviate suffering, even be it one that makes people request to die. But our hands shall not kill, even though we may be sentenced for that. As you know, a criminal conviction for refusal to practice euthanasia would be a serious violation of our freedom of religion, guaranteed under European and international law.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, intervention by video.
Mr. President, since the atrocities of October 7, anti-Semitism has surged globally at levels unseen in decades. What we are witnessing is not only hatred against Jews, it is direct assault on freedom of religion and belief. Jewish individuals across continents report fear in openly wearing religious symbols, attending synagogues, or expressing their identity. Not surprisingly, this hostility has escalated into violence. On Yom Kippur, a terror attack targeted a synagogue in Manchester during the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. On Hanukkah, a terrorist attack at Bondi Beach in Sydney struck Jews gathered to celebrate their faith. These attacks were not political. They were attacks on Jews as Jews, on the right to worship freely and safely. Anti-Semitism today manifests through violence, intimidation, and the systematic delegitimization of Jewish identity, including through efforts to deny the Jewish people's right to self-determination. Such acts undermine the core protection guaranteed under international human rights law. Mr. President, safeguarding the freedom of religion of the Jewish people is an urgent human rights imperative. We urge the Council and the Special Rapporteur to take robust action against religion-based anti-Semitic hatred, to recognize modern form of anti-Semitism, and to ensure that decisive measures are taken against hate and incitement targeting Jews worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Christian Solidarity Worldwide.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. CSW thanks the Special Rapporteur for her report. We respectfully highlight to the Government of Nigeria the Rapporteur's assertion that in the absence of a stated funeral preferences by the deceased, the rights holders of funeral rights are their next of kin and family, and then their community of practice. In the case of 13-year-old David Solomon Tafa, these rights are at risk. David died on the 28th of January in a state orphanage in Kano after the authorities failed to provide medical attention. On the 3rd of February, the Kano State Ministry of Women Affairs, Children and Disabled and the Attorney General of Kano reportedly filed, but later withdrew, a suit seeking the release of his body after post-mortem for burial according to Islamic rites. He remains unburied 1 month later. The authorities claim David had converted. However, he was a minor, held in a coercive environment, separated from his adoptive parents for close to 7 years. Their actions compound the trauma of a grieving family that has suffered years of injustice. Initially, 27 children were transported from the Do Mercy Children's Home under false pretenses in 2019 to the state-run orphanage, where the UN Working Group concluded that they were detained arbitrarily. CSW urges Nigeria's federal authorities to intervene to ensure David is laid to rest by his family at a time and place of their choosing. We also appeal for the immediate and unconditional release of the 7 remaining children into the care of Solomon and Mercy Tafa in accordance with the 2025 Kano State High Court consent judgment. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Humanists International.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the Special Rapporteur for her vital report, and we also thank the Special Rapporteur for her ardent support of the humanist and the non-religious community in Zambia. The issues faced in meeting our members in Zambia speak to wider societal trends which the government must work to tackle. In the present report, the inclusion of the experiences of humanist and atheist communities and the challenges they face in honouring their dead speaks to several underlying issues. In some states, a lack of religion is viewed as something which does not have a values base, and so no problem is seen with imposing other religious or cultural rights upon humanists and the non-religious. Whether someone has adopted a term like humanist or simply rejected religion, states must recognise that this is a valid and legitimate positive choice protected by the right to forb, and the decisions of the non-religious individuals should be granted the same standing as that of religious individuals. The situation is worse elsewhere. In too many countries, humanism and atheism is simply not recognised in life or in death. The non-religious are seen as amoral, pushed from public life, and blasphemy laws and apostasy laws are used to undermine their right to forb. Discrimination and non-recognition are rampant, including in death, and pervade from the state to the community level. Special Rapporteur, we would like to ask, how can we work to ensure that the non-religious are recognised and their rights in life and in death are vindicated under Article 18? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of British Humanist Association.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for her inclusive report. We particularly welcome its recognition that tensions can arise when the convictions of the deceased differ from those of their family or community. We echo concerns that stigma or hostility can mean that a person's non-religious identity may not have been publicly known during their lifetime, and that in such cases, families may face particular challenges in honouring the wishes of the deceased. Further, apostasy is illegal in 15 countries and punishable by death in 11 of those, contrary to the right to leave or to change one's religion or belief as identified in the report. It's therefore not only social stigma, community pressure, or interference from non-state actors that perpetuates this hostility, but the state itself. We would like to ask the Special Rapporteur, where identifying as non-religious or as belonging to a minority belief community exposes families to social or legal repercussions, what measures can help make sure that funeral rights remain practically accessible? And how might states best implement your recommendations around meaningful consultation and the duty to accommodate diverse communities in ways that do not require people to come forward at possible personal cost?
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Baha'i international community. You have the floor.
Mr. Vice President, the Baha'i international community welcomes the Special Rapporteur's attention to the ongoing persecution of Baha'is in Egypt. As noted in the Special Rapporteur's report, the 1960 presidential decree banning the Baha'i faith continues to shape this community's lived reality. From birth, Baha'is face legal uncertainty. Authorities refuse to recognize Baha'i marriages, creating prolonged obstacles to obtaining birth certificates for their children. Article 134 of the Civil Registry Regulations prohibits registration of Baha'i marriages, contradicting constitutional guarantee of freedom of religion or belief. The 2009 court ruling permitting Baha'i identity cards with a dash in the religion field has not ended discrimination, it has reinforced it, limiting education, employment, inheritance, and freedom of movement. Members of the community and those associating with them continue to face surveillance and interrogation, fostering fear and social isolation. Even in death, dignity is denied. Baha'is are restricted to a single overcrowded cemetery. With 1 month, 3 UN reports documented this worsening persecution. Several Arab countries are taking commendable steps to promote coexistence and inclusive citizenship. We respectfully urge Egypt to translate its human rights commitments into concrete steps ensuring Baha'is can live with dignity and equal rights from birth to burial. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Minority Rights Group.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Special Rapporteur, Minority Rights Group and the South Asia Collective warmly welcome your report. I'll focus on South Asia, a composite of many faith communities with a long tradition of cohabitation, yet increasingly becoming polarized along religious lines, fanned by nationalist politics. Denial of funeral rights has been part of this phenomenon of exclusion and marginalization. It takes a diversity of forms in South Asia. In Nepal, prohibitions have the effect of excluding non-Hindu groups from using public lands for burial. In Pakistan, authorities frequently deny minority Ahmadi Muslims access to public graveyards and often fail to prevent and punish mob violence which obstruct funerals and desecrate graves. Hindus, Sikhs, and Christians are often denied access to their funeral rites. In Sri Lanka, Tamil communities face restrictions on remembrance events of the 30-year civil war. Christians have been prevented from burying their dead, Muslims displaced by the LTTE are unable to mourn their dead, whilst during the COVID-19 pandemic, Muslims were forced to cremate their dead in violation of their religious practices. In India, Adivasi community Christians are often prevented from burying their deceased in village graveyards. Dalits continue facing caste-based barriers to cremate or bury their loved ones, while Muslim graveyards in Uttarakhand state face sustained demolitions and desecrations. In Kashmir, Chhattisgarh, and Uttar Pradesh, authorities also often forcibly bury bodies or withhold dead bodies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was the last speaker we could accommodate for this dialogue. I now give the floor to Ms. Ghanea for her concluding remarks. You have 5 minutes and 35 seconds.
Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, let me start by appreciating the willingness of the government of Zambia to engage on follow-up and for acknowledging the need everywhere, to be frank, for ongoing reflection and reform. It would be a duty and pleasure to support you in the follow-up. A number of governments raised, distinguished delegates raised questions. Paraguay, thank you for reiterating and recognizing the significance of this topic as a human right, and especially for indigenous peoples. Ecuador additionally drew attention to Afro-descendants. Critical to both nations and peoples is the link to ancestral territories and sacred spaces. Without respecting this link, not only are funeral rites wiped out, but also cosmovisions and spiritual traditions denied. They need critical attention. Germany, thank you for your endorsement of the key report's messages. Best practices include regarding interstate cooperation on funeral rites could be understood under the Council's Resolution 1618, reporting regularly to it, including the voices of civil society, would offer a platform, at least in relation to the more grave violations that arise in funeral rites. And engagement of municipal actors under that banner also offers an opportunity. Ireland, thank you for echoing the serious concern on minorities around the world, and also your point about the legal status of same-sex couples in law and its impact for funeral rights as reflected in the report. Interfaith dialogues and consultations need to be regular, sustained, inclusive, and based on trust. Of course, those conversations are on many issues, but are invaluable in this arena too. Italy, thank you for raising concern of religious minorities, including Baha'is around the world, and your continued attention to this matter. Neutral or general legislation must be reviewed in consultation with the wide range of religion and belief constituents to hear them out in order to ensure that these rights are respected to the maximum extent possible. Rwanda, thank you for highlighting the importance of limitations. It's through the limitations framework that any restriction on funeral rights should be considered. And of course, in all of your delegations' engagement with the UN Human Rights Committee, that's an opportunity to explore that further, and General Comment 22 gives great guidance. Thanks are also due to the following, underscoring and contextualizing key messages of the report. Pakistan, on behalf of the OIC, for concurring on its key messages and drawing attention to the urgency to respect Muslim burial places, and for highlighting Islamic jurisprudence on the matter. Thank you. The EU, thank you for noting the 40th anniversary of this mandate next week, and that freedom of religion or belief is a work in progress everywhere. Bahrain, on behalf of the GCC, indeed, it is an ethical responsibility to uphold funeral rights, and as we know only too well here, it's also a legal obligation. Kenya, on behalf of the African group, thank you for noting the importance of inclusive dialogue and for the importance of consulting traditional leaders as well. Norway, on behalf of the Nordic and Baltic states, indeed, it is a time of heightened vulnerability, and more needs to be done to promote funeral rights as freedom of religion or belief. I hope that this report, sorry, I meant funerals are a time of heightened vulnerability. Perhaps there are other vulnerabilities also going on. But in relation to this report, I hope that it will offer a springboard to and further energize efforts to give attention to this matter. Events unfolding around the world, around us, compel me to draw attention of this august body's attention to the report on peace and freedom of religion or belief, which I presented a year and a half ago, A79182. The Holy See, thank you very much for shedding light on Catholic belief and insights on this topic. And Sovereign Order of Malta, the topic of humanitarian crises and conflicts will be addressed in the next report. It deserved specific attention. Hungary, I concur with you absolutely that this right is critical to social cohesion as well. India, thank you for drawing the attention to local authorities and how central they are in effective implementation of funeral rights. And Namibia for drawing attention to the need to support persons in vulnerable situations. And this alerted me to the fact that the report could have, if it had more space, engaged developing protections and norms about the rights of elderly persons. Botswana, I agree that violating funeral rights causes lasting harm on families and communities. Kuwait, thank you for drawing attention to the targeting of Muslims around the world, which must be countered robustly, and for your call for educational materials to combat this strongly. This is very welcome. Jordan, absolutely, public health, environmental law, and other regulations and concerns are well noted and can be considered along full respect of freedom of religion or belief and funeral rights. Pakistan, I concur, I agree that indeed funeral rights uphold the rights of the living, not only those who have passed on. UK, thank you very much for raising cases, particular cases here that you also shared that you raised through other channels too regarding religious minorities. Now an omnibus one, China, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam. The inclusion of concrete cases in this report are indeed very brief and in some ways incomplete. Verified human rights information, of course, does not only come from the state. Mandate holders are rightly obligated to engage with civil society. And quite a number of the mentions of particular cases referred to allegation letters which have their own modality for the engagement with state authorities, and I would continue to welcome engagement. So unless the source gives consent in their inputs to the mandate and to the report, I am unable to reveal them. So a number of the issues that were raised by civil society actors were based on extensive reports and engagement with specific laws, and I can only urge you to consider them carefully. Netherlands drew attention to the fact that funeral rights go to the core of human beings, and desecrations indeed are harrowing and should be harrowing for all of us, including across generations. Afghanistan, I'm very concerned about many religious and belief minorities in Afghanistan, but especially the Shia and Hazaras, and especially under the new criminal code. And I will continue to cooperate with Richard Bennett in taking forward concerns. And the gender dimensions are significant, and I agree that it was overlooked in the report. Our word limit has been cut back. Canada, thank you for drawing attention to minorities who are violated not only in life, but also through death. And the powerful idea of, and disturbing idea of the weaponization of death. Thank you for your good practice in this council of drawing attention to the painful legacy of violation of funeral rights in your own country as well. Eswatini, you drew attention to the important point of the timeliness of issuing permits and death certificates. If there was space, it would have been good to include this. And the State of Palestine, indeed, you shared harrowing accounts, and I appreciate your inputs, which have been considered already for the next report. Very briefly for civil society, conscientious objection by War Resisters International raised in a previous report, and I agree it's still relevant here. Property rights and land rights raised by International Association for Religious Freedom. This is reflected in the report and is hugely important, especially for indigenous. Thank you, World Evangelical Alliance and Christian Solidarity Worldwide for the years of input and human rights work. Little Sisters of the Poor, European Centre of Law and Justice, please do share the proposed law with the new mandate. Special procedures can obviously raise issues with states present. I will be less than 1 minute. International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, when communities can't even mark their holy days in peace or wear their religious symbols out of fear, we are undoubtedly witnessing severe violations of human rights, including of funeral rights. Humanists International and the British Humanist Association, thank you for your inputs into this report. You have a number of questions that I don't think I can do justice to here, but if there is fear, then indeed humanists will not declare how they wish to be buried, and that's unfortunate because that means that they cannot even be respected following their death. Baha'i International Community, thank you for your inputs in raising funeral rights in Egypt as well as in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Lack of burial spaces is a serious violation, as this report draws attention to. Minority rights group, as you say, polarization along religious lines of South Asia's communities that have long coexisted in peace, is devastating and due to nationalistic and exclusionary propaganda. Let me end by thanking all of you, the Vice President, for kindly giving me a little bit extra time and your active endorsement and engagement. And I look forward to my next country visits, which I understand will be to Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ghanea. This brings us to the end of this interactive dialogue. I wish to thank the Special Rapporteur for her participation. We will take a short break before holding the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on human rights defenders. Excellencies, we'll begin the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. Let me welcome the mandate holder, Ms. Mary Lawlor. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. I now give the floor to Ms. Lawlor to present her reports.
Mr. Presidency, Excellencies, friends, it is always a pleasure to be here and to interact with you. Today I want to bring the voices of human rights defenders directly to the Council. This is a venue where their presence should be integral to its functioning, yet their access is increasingly restricted. Human rights defenders are ordinary people doing extraordinary work, engaged at once in the struggle for a better world and the dance of their own lives. They work with the unstoppable energy of hope. But first, let me turn to my official visit to Bosnia and Herzegovina. I thank the authorities for facilitating the visit and for their constructive engagement. Thanks also to all those I met who shared their insights and recommendations before and during the visit. Human rights defenders in the country work in a society that is still deeply divided, where the wounds of the past have not healed yet, and where institutions are susceptible to political influence, corruption is widespread, and patriarchal views remain prevalent. I commend them for their dedication, bravery, and perseverance. Defenders working on transitional justice, environmental activists, defenders on the rights of persons with disabilities, defenders of LGBTI people and migrants and minority groups, and journalists who are human rights defenders are among those most affected by this hostile climate. Several recent legislative developments presented a significant setback for civic space, especially in Republika Srpska, as they exacerbated stigmatization of human rights defenders and journalists, imposed additional burdens and restrictions on their work, and often forced them to resort to self-censorship. Women, of course, are at the forefront of all human rights struggles in the country, and being a woman is a risk multiplier there. I'm particularly appalled by the targeting of environmental rights defenders, who are often warned to stop their activism or face lengthy and costly slap lawsuits aimed at silencing them. I also abhor the complete impunity for the attack against LGBT rights defenders in 2023, which, along with widespread online hate speech, created a sense of insecurity among LGBTI defenders. The authorities must protect human rights defenders, ensure accountability for attacks against them, and tackle negative narratives around their work by publicly acknowledging their essential role in building a society rooted in human rights. Turning to my report, the title of my report speaks for itself: Defending Dignity and Claiming Rights. Human rights defenders hold firm to universal values as others desert them. For this report, I received an unprecedented 300+ submissions from human rights defenders in 82 countries and territories. Human rights defenders have demanded to be heard at a time when states surrendered their values on the altar of security, chauvinism, authoritarianism, and tradition. While governments renege on their international human rights commitments and send us off spinning, of course, it is left to human rights defenders around the world to keep alive the promise of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We all need freedom from fear and freedom from want, the twin pillars of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These pillars guarantee the equality and dignity inherent in every human being. Human rights defenders promote and protect that right and that dignity, the same dignity that we are privileged to have for ourselves here in this room and would not want denied. The human rights defenders understand that human rights are inseparable from daily living, and that if we have them, we must all work so that others do too. Nowhere is the unshakable motivation of human rights defenders clearer than in the words of a children's rights activist from Somalia, who said in his submission, "I defend human rights because I cannot stand by while children are cut or married off before they are even teenagers." For me, this is not Western ideology, as extremists accuse. It is simply love, dignity, and the right to a future. Yet this work is being undermined by consistent failures in political will, the near total subordination of values to interests, ever-increasing power grabs by authoritarian governments, and the massive funding cuts, which have pulled the rug from under so many human rights organisations and individuals. In gender apartheid Afghanistan, where women and girls have been erased by the Taliban and left with nothing, a woman-led NGO has had to suspend or limit their services to children and women who are under severe psychological pressure due to deprivation, violence, discrimination and social crisis. It has also increased the risks human rights defenders face. The Kenny Institute for Forest and Environmental Studies in Peru noted that because of funding cuts, in many cases we have had to sacrifice protection measures for the institution staff in order to continue with the cases. Many states perceive human rights defenders as the problem, and instead of trying to address the issues that they highlight, they try to silence them. No one is born a human rights defender. They are sculpted into one by the injustice that they witness in society. Consider, for instance, the human rights defenders working in the Arcana Women's Centre in India, in Kerala, who saw gender-based violence on a daily basis, but, and I quote, "Working with women, youth and families has shown us how defending rights is not abstract. It can transform someone's safety, health and opportunities." All states must do better in consistently upholding human rights and consistently condemning violation wherever they take place and whoever the identity of the perpetrator is. Yet, so too must the institutions designed to promote and protect human rights. Ever-growing numbers of human rights defenders are turning to the UN for support as their domestic pathways for accountability and justice narrow. Such mechanisms must become more responsive, more agile, and more urgent. Human rights defenders have laid out in this report some of the changes they believe that are necessary in the human rights architecture to make it more effective. Many of these are changes in process rather than ones which require huge sums of money. Notwithstanding the challenges facing the special procedures and other mechanisms, as my 6 years in this role draws to a close, I would urge caution in any attempt to hollow out special procedures or pare back on their independence. We all understand giving budget constraints changes must happen, yet it strikes me that it is one of the few international mechanisms left which can bring out remote and marginalised voices and act to uphold human rights without undue political influence and untouched by double standards. Mandate holders given their time freely, and in a world where so much public cynicism exists around high salaries of public officials, both nationally and internationally, this is something to be fought for. Dear friends, you are good people, and we are all in this together. There is always something one can do as a government official to help protect a human rights defender. The atrocities of the world have numbed us and made us helpless and hopeless at times. But ways can be found to better protect human rights defenders. I've had many examples of good people in ministries, in embassies, who are human rights defenders themselves when they have taken action rooted in their values and in their place. They do not become part of a managed retreat on human rights. I understand as a society that there is a societal initiative in Geneva that would see a coming together of not only states but civil society, academia, media and other actors to reaffirm their respect of and adherence to international law without exception. And at such a time of crisis, I urge you to support it. I am sometimes deeply ashamed to be human. When I see the unending insanity and barbaric savagery around the world and the peaceful, persistent, relentless efforts and quiet resilience of human rights defenders working within the standards to which you have all agreed. We didn't make them up. only to be killed, disappeared, criminalized in many cases for decades, to get them out of the way, physically attacked, tortured, intimidated or smeared. I think human rights defenders have a kind of mystical spirit. That spirit is captured in the words of Betty Carina, who was murdered in Oaxaca. She said, "Today we want to live another history. We are rebelling and we are saying enough is enough. Today and here, we want to say that they are afraid of us because we are not afraid of them, because despite their threats, despite their harassment, despite their slander, we continue to walk towards the sun, which we think shines brightly." Thank you.
Thank you. According to our practice, we will start by hearing from the delegation of the country concerned. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina. You have 5 minutes. I understand that they are not in the room, so we will continue. Now the list of speakers is closed. I now invite interested delegations to ask questions to the Special Rapporteur and to make comments on her reports. The speaking time is 1 minute 30 seconds for all. I would like to recall that the duration of interactive dialogues is 1 hour and 30 minutes. However, if time permits, additional delegations will be able to speak. So I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, Special Rapporteur. I speak on behalf of the Nordic Baltic states, and we thank Special Rapporteur Lawler for her report. Special Rapporteur, in line with your recommendations, we highlight and support the need to ensure that responses to violations of international human rights law are not dependent on geography or political alignment. We are worried that cuts to development assistance budgets will affect the work of human rights defenders. We recognize the need for flexible core support to human rights defenders' organizations, as well as funding for emergency response. We urge all states to introduce laws and policies to protect and support human rights defenders. Similarly, we urge states to refrain from criminalizing or curtailing the ability of human rights defenders to receive financial resources from abroad. Finally, we invite all states to support the mandate renewal presented to the Council. As this is the last time Special Rapporteur Lawler reports to this Council, we would like to thank her for all her hard work and determination for human rights defenders around the world and for her perseverance in this mandate. As you finish 6 years in this mandate, what are your reflections, Special Rapporteur, on the main achievements during your time in the role? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The EU thanks Special Rapporteur Lawler for her report and tireless work over the past 6 years. We reiterate our strong support for her mandate. Special Rapporteur, your report highlights the work undertaken by human rights defenders, often at great personal risk. We share your concern that the space to defend human rights is more restricted, including through foreign agents' laws and other restrictive legislation, global funding cuts, transnational repression, discrimination, violence and harassment. The EU commends the resilience and continued work of human rights defenders, including those in exile. As outlined in the EU Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy, engagement with and support to human rights defenders is a top priority. Across the world, we engage with HRDs and uphold the legitimacy of their work, including by observing trials, issuing statements, and advocating for their immediate and unconditional release when they are arbitrarily detained. We also provide support to many defenders and their organizations. The EU guidelines on human rights defenders anchor our commitment to safeguarding those who courageously champion dignity and justice, offering a clear, principled commitment to shield their essential work from threats and persecution. Madam Special Rapporteur, how can states champion human rights defenders, turning the tide against stigma and spotlighting their vital role in society? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of UN Women on behalf of a group of UN agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. This statement is delivered on behalf of UN Women, UNFPA and UNICEF. We welcome the Special Rapporteur's report and express our deep appreciation for her prioritization of women and girl human rights defenders throughout her mandate. Women human rights defenders, as well as girl and LGBTQI+ defenders, continue to face gendered risks, including harassment, reprisals for cooperation with the UN, lawsuits and attacks targeting their families and communities. A recent report by UN Women reveals that 7 in 10 women human rights defenders have experienced online violence, highlighting the need for age and gender-responsive protection frameworks. In times of increased challenges for defenders, we are working closely with OHCHR and other UN partners to reinforce accountability for the protection of women and girls defenders, including for the UN Gender Equality Acceleration Plan. At a time when many women organizations are facing daunting financial cuts, we invite member states and more UN entities to join us in these efforts. The UN Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund is also vital in directing funds to defenders operating in crisis. Dear Special Rapporteur, how can the UN system better prevent, monitor and respond to reprisals against women and girls human rights defenders engaging with international mechanisms, including this Council? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Vice President. The DRC is grateful to the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of her thematic report entitled Defending Dignity and Claiming Rights. My country shares the vision according to which human dignity is the cornerstone of all human rights. We greet the courage of human rights defenders, often in difficult contexts, working to ensure that this is not just lip service. The DRC has Act 23027 of the 15th of June 2023 relating to protection and responsibility around human rights defenders, and we reiterate our constant commitment to the protection of the civic space. This commitment has been manifested by legislative reforms and key institutional changes aimed at strengthening the rule of law and ensuring a safe environment for civil society. Furthermore, my country remains concerned by the persistence of insecurity in the east of the country, where the militancy of armed groups, particularly the Congo River Alliance and the M23, supported by Rwanda, represents a direct and ongoing threat to physical integrity of human rights defenders as well as their freedom of action. To conclude, the DRC repeats its willingness to continue close and constructive collaboration with the Special Rapporteur's mandate. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Vice President, China noted the final report by Ms. Lawler, his final report, and opposes the misinformation in the report and the biased allegations that smear the rule of law in Hong Kong region. China is a country with the rule of law. All are equal before the law, with no exception for anyone in any region. No profession or status can serve as an excuse to evade legal accountability. Human rights defender is not a special group and must follow the law. To label criminals as human rights defenders so as to whitewash illegal acts should be condemned by the international community. China urges the SRM to carry out the mandate impartially and objectively, abide by the Code of Conduct for Special Procedures, respect China's sovereignty, and give due weight to the authoritative reply by China without being misled by misinformation. On this basis, China is ready to conduct constructive dialogue with the SRM with mutual respect. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guatemala.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Guatemala is grateful to the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of her report and appreciates the recognition of the key role played by human rights defenders for the enforcement of the rule of law and democracy. As a result, we categorically reject the criminalisation and persecution of all human rights defenders promoted by our public prosecutor. At the end of last year, Guatemala adopted its public policy around the protection for human rights defenders, which resulted from a wide-ranging process bringing in specific mechanisms for journalists, environmental rights defenders, land rights defenders, and a technical roundtable to tackle context of criminalisation. We fully trust in this instrument as a mechanism to protect the acts of defenders from any risk that might put them in danger. We also have placed particular focus on the protection of authorities and leaders of indigenous people and women defenders, recognising that these confront differentiated risks and that their participation is key for social cohesion and democratic governability. Guatemala reiterates its preparedness to continue cooperating with the special procedures and recognises the value of their visits and reports to strengthen national protection ability. We would like to ask, what elements does the Rapporteur consider to be key in order to allow national mechanisms for protection to be accessible and create trust for human rights defenders themselves? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Thank you, Vice President. We appreciate the Special Rapporteur's report, as well as her efforts to set up direct communication with defenders, with a view to sharing their situation and increasing their voices. Mexico recognises the work of defenders, which is a core part of our democratic life, and the ongoing construction of a pluralist society. We know well that we have challenges before us in the defence of their rights. As a result, to ensure that they have a safe space, we have enacted legislation and policies and set up specific institutions. One of the most relevant is the mechanism for the protection of defenders and journalists, established in 2012. This with a view to being pluralist and democratic. The governing board of that mechanism includes defenders, civil society, the representatives from the HCHR in Mexico and Mexican authorities, in a participatory exercise where decisions are shared in order to establish protection measures for defenders, including environmental defenders, in line with the obligations enshrined in the Escazú Agreement. Given this is the last time that the Council will hold a dialogue with this rapporteur, Mexico would like to take the opportunity to thank her for her dedication and cooperation over the last 6 years, recognising the significant contributions she's made and wishing her the very best in her future projects. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Armenia.
Thank you, Vice President. Armenia welcomes the Special Rapporteur. We agree that the right to defend human rights is under strain and the risk faced by human rights defenders remains severe worldwide. As a traditional co-sponsor of the resolution both in this Council and the General Assembly, we attach particular importance to the work of this mandate. As a country with established democratic system, vibrant civil society, and the status as a national human rights institution, Armenia fully acknowledges the indispensable role of human rights defenders in building resilient and inclusive societies where genuine pluralism and voices of dissent are neither undermined nor silenced. We are also convinced that the dialogue with the civil society, including through instrumentalizations formats, should be built on mature respect. While we value independent monitoring, we also emphasize that engagement on complex issues should avoid selective narratives and contribute to social cohesion rather than deepening divisions. Vice President, civil society, human rights defenders, and civil activism were at the heart of Armenia's democratic transformation. Progressive human rights reforms and higher level of accountability ensured public trust and development outcomes for our country. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of UNFPA.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. UNFPA welcomes the Special Rapporteur's report, recognizing that women's rights defenders stand up for the inalienable rights of everyone, such as the right to decide if, when, and how many children to have, free from coercion and violence. 32 years ago, women's rights activists and advocates played a key role in forging the International Conference on Population and Development and its program of action. Today, we see the same drive from young women activists helping tear down the remaining barriers standing between their rights and choices. However, women human rights defenders currently face significant challenges in their work, as found by the Special Rapporteur's report. Sexual and reproductive health and rights speak to the realities, aspirations, and choices women make from the very intimate spheres of their homes to the public spaces of their communities, the world of work, and political life. When we think about women's human rights defenders, women leaders come to mind, but we also need to underscore the role and achievements of ordinary women who have made an extraordinary impact in their countries and communities, working as health workers, midwives, teachers, mentors, community counselors, caregivers, and many other roles. UNFPA stands firm in its commitment to advance rights and choices for all by supporting women human rights defenders in their tireless efforts to hold governments accountable for discharging their human rights obligations and commitments. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Palestinian human rights defenders are deliberately targeted by Israel, the occupying power, because they expose its violations and demand accountability, subjecting them to willful killings, arbitrary detention, harassment, intrusive surveillance, smear campaigns, and reprisals for engaging with UN bodies and the ICC. This extends to those who support accountability at international level. The Special Rapporteur on the Situation of Human Rights in OPT since 1967, as well as the Commission of Inquiry, judges and prosecutors of the ICC have faced political pressure and sanctions for fulfilling their mandates. At the same time, sanctions against Al-Haq, Al-Mizan, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, Ad-Damir, are a direct assault on freedom of expression, an association, and a calculated attempt to obstruct international justice. The Israeli crimes continue despite the ICJ rulings, which remain ignored alongside international law. On the ground, defenders, including journalists and lawyers, are killed with their families, displaced and obstructed from documenting atrocities. All these measures are intended to prevent accountability. War criminals must be the ones sanctioned, and human rights defenders must be the ones shielded. Therefore, we ask what immediate concrete steps can be taken to end these sanctions and reprisals and to ensure real protection and accountability for those who cooperate with UN mechanisms. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg.
Monsieur le
Vice President, Luxembourg fully aligns itself with the EU's statement. Luxembourg thanks you, Special Rapporteur, for your undying commitment for human rights defenders. We share your conviction that those who protect fundamental freedoms must be able to divest their mission in complete security. We wish to express our deep-rooted concern in the face of the ongoing deterioration of their situation in many regions the world over. Attacks, intimidation, increasing restrictions of the civic space, and fake news campaigns too often seek to reduce to silence those who defend fundamental rights. Your report highlights the weakening of international and national protection mechanisms. Many defenders judge them to be only partially effective or even insufficient, while their needs increase. In this context, the warning concerning a possible mental health crisis among defenders, thanks to exhaustion, isolation, and the erosion of psychosocial support tools, is particularly concerning. We fully share your finding, according to which combating disinformation constitutes a key element for guaranteeing a safe and robust environment for the work of defenders. Special Rapporteur, I'd like to take this opportunity to convey to you our profound gratitude for your remarkable and undying commitment that you have dedicated to this mandate since 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cote d'Ivoire.
Monsieur le Vice-président,
Vice President, Cote d'Ivoire congratulates the Special Rapporteur on the presentation of her report, which highlights the motivations of human rights defenders to practice their right to promote, protect, and defend human rights, despite the risks to which they are exposed. My country expresses its deep concern given the threats and impediments against the free activities of human rights defenders, particularly through the drastic reduction of funding allocated to the human rights ecosystems over the past years, to the adoption of laws which prohibit or heavily tax foreign funding for human rights defenders, or the absence of sufficient guarantees for their safety. Cote d'Ivoire is aware of their contribution to strengthening the rule of law and has taken concrete measures, including the law to protect and promote human rights defenders and its decree, as well as an interministerial decision. These legal instruments have allowed for the establishment of a mechanism to protect human rights defenders, which is fully operational. My delegation calls on all stakeholders to step up efforts to support human rights defenders by ensuring a safe and propitious environment for their activities. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Burkina Faso.
Mr. Vice President, my delegation would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of her report and commend her on the accomplishment of her mandate. We take note of the recommendations of the Special Rapporteur, in particular that inviting countries to step up their commitment to protect human rights defenders and protect the integrity of international human rights, as well as to abstain from any provisions which would criminalize or impede the ability of human rights defenders from receiving foreign funding, or to abolish those that have already been received. My country aligns itself with the Declaration on the Human Rights Defenders and has expressed this in its own law at a national level to protect all human rights defenders. However, we would like to point out that the quality of human rights defenders does not mean that they bear no responsibility. This is why while we provide protection to human rights defenders, our same law also makes it incumbent upon them to be transparent and impartial in promoting human rights and in compliance with legislation. We take note of the recommendations of the Special Rapporteur and wish the best of success to her as she continues her career. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Vice President, the work of genuine human rights defenders isn't only important, it is essential. We're delighted to have many of them in our country, actively participating in the design, drafting and implementation of programs with wide-ranging social impact. Many of them have been recognized recently by Cuban society for their support of the UN system. It's regrettable that some attempt to pass off people who are clearly not deserving of the noble title of human rights defenders. People who break laws are not human rights defenders. Those that try to bring down a freely chosen constitution, those who act on the whim of foreign powers in order to promote their interfering agendas around regime change. Those conducts are not permissible in any society upholding the rule of law. Cuban society will continue to be consolidated by human rights defenders as a key actor in our society. We will always recognise the work of valid human rights defenders that warrant protection and recognition the world over. We reiterate our preparedness to engage in constructive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur based on mutual respect and objectivity. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Czechia.
Mr. Vice President, the Czech Republic expresses its full support to the mandate of the Special Rapporteur.
We welcome the thematic report on the motivation of human rights defenders and obstacles they are facing and appreciate its timely submission. We support the proposal to establish a simplified OHCHR procedure to submit complaints and to strengthen the follow-up to individual cases on reprisals. We express our deep concern on the situation of human rights defenders in Russia and Belarus. We urge Russia to release independent journalist Olga Komleva, imprisoned for 12 years, and immediately provide her with medical care. Madam Special Rapporteur, we agree with your recommendation that states should refrain from introducing legislation criminalizing or curtailing the ability of human rights defenders to receive finances from abroad. Could you share with us your experience and lessons learned from your cooperation with states in this area? To conclude, we thank you for your important work in the past 6 years as the Special Rapporteur. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador.
Gracias. Thank you very much, Vice President. My delegation is grateful to the Rapporteur for her report and agrees, among other things, with her recommendation that states should strengthen their commitment to the international mechanisms designed to provide support to human rights defenders, including through appropriate funding and the flexibility that is necessary in their procedures. In Ecuador, the protection of human rights of all citizens and Ecuadorians abroad is enshrined in the law, without prejudice to which the Ministry of Government, alongside the Ombudsman, has set up an interinstitutional board for the construction of a comprehensive policy for the promotion and protection for human rights defenders and environmental rights defenders, as well as journalists. In this process, we have finished the theoretical process and progressed with a methodological design of a qualitative diagnosis to identify risk situations at a national scale. Additionally, through the strengthening technical cooperation, we are seeking to identify and make use of practical tools for the protection of defenders, including through gender, generational and intercultural focuses, and improve processes for training in analysis of risk and self-protection. Finally, we'd like to thank the Rapporteur for her excellent work and wish her the very best for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of UNICEF via video statement.
UNICEF welcomes the Special Rapporteur's final report and expresses deep appreciation for her commitment to shining a spotlight on the specific challenges faced by child human rights defenders throughout her mandate. Across the world, children are at the forefront of social, economic, and political change. In defending human dignity and claiming their rights, they advance universal values and international human rights standards. Yet the right to defend human rights is increasingly under threat. Child human rights defenders face particular risks because of their age and the nature of their civic engagement, including intimidation and reprisals, both online and offline. They also face disproportionate barriers in acting as human rights defenders, including because of social norms that challenge their agency and right to participate in public life. UNICEF calls on states to ensure a safe environment for children to promote and protect human rights. This requires comprehensive age and gender responsive laws and policies that protect child defenders at all stages of their work. We also echo the Special Rapporteur's call to states to strengthen protection networks to prevent violations, ensure accountability, and provide effective remedies. Supporting child human rights defenders is essential to advancing dignity, equality, and lasting change for all. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Señor Vicepresidente.
Vice President, Special Rapporteur, Spain aligns itself with the EU statement and expresses its thanks for the tireless and committed work carried out in this mandate, culminating in this report, raising the voice of protagonists and offering an overview of the challenges before us. Human rights defenders are agents of positive change, and they make reality the universal declaration that we need so much to protect right now. Oftentimes they pay too high a price in so doing. The deterioration of democratic values, the proliferation of restrictive legislation and the criminalisation of the activities of human rights defenders are just some of the challenges we are facing. We reject the existential threats suffered by defenders for carrying out their work and for cooperating with this Council's mechanisms. The deliberate reducing of the UN funding is having a devastating impact on the mandate of the OHCHR, as well as the special procedures and the treaty bodies, as well as on the ability of human rights defenders to carry out their role. As a previous defender cited in their report, the greatest risk is silence, organised silence, thanks to a lack of resources. We are concerned by the double standards and attack on their legitimacy. Special Rapporteur, what would be your recommendation to respond to Guatemala's point concerning strengthening the protection programs for human rights defenders themselves? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Afghanistan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We welcome the report of the Special Rapporteur with deep concern that budgetary reductions across different states are severely obstructing the work of human rights defenders and of the human rights ecosystem at large. As Madam Special Rapporteur notes, in Afghanistan, Taliban's repressive policies continue to persecute human rights defenders, especially women-led non-governmental organizations. The systematic framing of defenders as collaborators with foreign entities hinders the moral and humanitarian responsibility that arises from the convictions that the abuses they observed are fundamentally wrong. Mr. Vice President, defending human rights is not a choice, but a firm response to severe injustices. We join Madam Special Rapporteur's call to prioritize protection of human rights defenders and ensure that international human rights mechanisms continue to act as meaningful platforms to support their work. Madam Special Rapporteur, we thank you and we want to commend your tireless work and advocacy for human rights defenders in Afghanistan and elsewhere. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica.
Gracias, señor vicepresidente.
Thank you very much, President. Costa Rica is grateful to the Special Rapporteur for the perceptive information concerning the range of reasons that mean and lead people to involve themselves in human rights. We're struck by the increase in alliances of defenders. In times of scarce resources and the fragmentation of messages, it's vital to seek convergence on a common point, defending the right to defend rights. In a parallel way to the particular characteristics, defenders of human rights are brought together by a core belief, the enjoyment of the right to defend yourself and be defended by others. In their diversity, they all agree on this. And the more this common cause becomes clearer and better defended, the more the various causes are protected. Promoting freedom of expression, the right to peaceful protest and access to justice, among other things, are essential in this context. The report also lays clear the complexity of establishing and maintaining a system able to protect human rights defenders sufficiently. Costa Rica would like to urge all to think about the whether or not the system that we've created is fit for purpose in this light, including this council, whether or not they continue to be appropriate for these ends. In this vein, it is important to review the context and the abilities of defenders so that they can uphold the essential human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Liechtenstein thanks the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of her report, which emphasizes how recent funding cuts to the human rights ecosystem, coupled with the alarming trend of democratic backsliding, have significantly narrowed civic space and exposed human rights defenders to heightened risks in carrying out their vital work. Criminalizing human rights defenders and labeling them as foreign agents are not only worrying developments, but warning signs that human rights and democratic principles are further eroded. Moreover, The number of attacks against and the killing of human rights defenders is increasing. This is simply unacceptable. Mr. Vice President, Liechtenstein deeply values human rights defenders' indispensable role for the promotion and protection of human rights, including at the Human Rights Council. We strongly condemn all acts of intimidation, reprisals, and violence directed against them. We call on all states to ensure accountability for violations and reprisals committed against human rights defenders for their cooperation with the United Nations. Madam Special Rapporteur, you recommend building more robust support systems for human rights defenders. How can we contribute in this regard to better protect human rights defenders? I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Montenegro.
Vice President, we thank the Special Rapporteur for the compelling report. As it powerfully recalls, defending dignity and claiming rights are the living promises of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The report highlights that human rights defenders are essential to upholding these promises. They sustained the 1998 Declaration of Human Rights Defenders and transform rights into tangible actions, justice and protection. Around the world, they demonstrate that defending human rights is both a right and an obligation to this generation and the next. Human rights defenders help sustain civic space. They demand justice and hold power accountable. They protect the silenced and defend the vulnerable. Grounded in international law, they serve as a moral compass. When democracy falters or conflict erupts, they often serve as the last line of defense against abuse. Their work is essential for the rule of law, social cohesion, and resilient, inclusive societies. Yet this work is under attack. Civic space is shrinking, criminalizing is rising. Reprisals target those who engage with the UN mechanisms. Funding cuts are severe. Each attack weakens accountability and puts human rights at risk. States have the primary responsibility for ensuring a safe and enabling environment. International mechanisms support this, but cannot replace national commitment and accountability. The Council must act, safeguard civic space, restore sustainable support, prevent reprisals, and protect human rights defenders, because protecting them is intrinsically linked to protecting human rights itself. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Marshall Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Republic of the Marshall Islands thanks the Special Rapporteur for her report. We express our deepest appreciation for the work of civil society and human rights defenders. Despite the multitude of risks that they, their communities, and the networks face, and constraints in the availability of resources, human rights defenders still demonstrate tireless commitment to expose grave human rights violations. We remain concerned about the dangers and hostilities that climate and environmental human rights defenders in particular face. As the report highlights, both state and non-state actors are responsible for perpetrating systemic environmental harm and threatening or harming human rights defenders. Climate and environmental human rights defenders, who often are from the very communities affected by these issues, are critical to achieving the human rights to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and more needs to be done to ensure their protection. For that reason, the Marshall Islands supports the Special Rapporteur's call for the enforcement of international human rights law against all violators, regardless of identity. As her tenure comes to an end, we want to thank the Special Rapporteur for her work over the past 6 years. Her work highlights the need for continued scrutiny and better protection for all human rights defenders. Como dada, and I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Colombia is grateful to the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of her report, which highlights the stigmatization, criminalization, and violence confronted by those who defend human rights the world over. As a country that's committed to peace, that has undergone a particular vulnerability, we understand their vulnerability as a result of armed conflict and illegal economies, where the fates of environmental rights and defenders of indigenous people are marginalized historically and confront persistent challenges. The report highlights the multiple forms of violence confronted by women, indigenous peoples, communities of African descent, LGBTQI+ people, migrants, young people and persons with disabilities. We would highlight the Rapporteur's recommendation to strengthen international protection mechanisms, their resources and their accessibility, particularly in rural and remote areas, as well as her call to put in place, or rather confront any measure restricting the exercise of human rights defenders or limiting their financial resources. Rapporteur, allow me on behalf of Colombia to express our high appreciation and recognition for your work and for the tireless work you have carried out for the defence of the civic space and the work and life of human rights defenders in Colombia and the world over. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Peru expresses its profound concern pursuant to the current situation faced by human rights defenders across the world. They continue to confront risks, acts of intimidation and violence because of their legitimate work. We're grateful to the Special Rapporteur for her report, and we recognise her valuable role in raising awareness concerning these challenges and making recommendations to create safe environments for human rights defenders. Peru reaffirms its commitment to their protection. Peru has an intersectoral mechanism for the protection of human rights defenders, which sets up preventive and protective actions for with differentiated patterns for particularly vulnerable defenders, defenders of the environment, women and so forth. In September 2024, we established a tool which will allow us to follow up on particular situations and reports. We're aware that we have persisting challenges, and we will continue to promote dialogue with civil society, strengthening interinstitutional coordination. Peru reiterates its preparedness to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur and exchange good practice concerning this issue with other states. We're convinced that the effective protection of human rights is key for the full oversight of the rule of law and a genuine democracy. Thank you, Vice President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of El Salvador.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Vice President. El Salvador recognises the work carried out by the Special Rapporteur and appreciates her last report as mandate holder, which highlights the key challenges confronted by human rights defenders. El Salvador reiterates its commitment to the legitimate right to defend rights. This is a conviction which has been manifested in robust institutionalization, which acts in line with the strict guarantee of fundamental rights, ensuring a fostering environment for this work in a context of freedom and security. Our country has carried out unprecedented efforts to overcome historic peace and justice obstacles. In this transformative process, the state reiterates that each public policy and security initiative is strictly in line with the principles of equality, impartiality, and due process. As a specific protection measure, we would highlight that the El Salvadorian Criminal Code criminalizes any attack on work carried out by people protecting human rights. This provision is a legal instrument to recognize the particular vulnerability of those who promote and protect human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay.
Thank you, President. Uruguay is grateful to the Special Rapporteur for her report, which conflates the voices of human rights defenders in a context of growing challenges for human rights and the international framework which upholds them. And we take due note of its recommendations. We reiterate our full commitment to the work of human rights defenders and the promotion and protection of human rights. Their role is essential to have oversight of the rule of law and accountability. As an international community, we must ensure a safe and fostering environment for their work, incorporating a gender perspective and addressing differentiated risks being confronted. We appreciate that the report highlights how their work has been seriously threatened, including by financial cuts and by legislation restricting or excessively undermining foreign funding. We join the call to renew a commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and recognise the oversight mechanisms and accountability vis-à-vis reprisals towards those cooperating with the UN. Special Rapporteur, you warn about a possible mental health crisis among human rights defenders in the current budgetary context. What priority measures should be adopted by states and the international system to forestall this situation and ensure we have a situation that allows them to continue with their work? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
شكرا سيدي النائب الرئيس. نأخذ علما بالتقرير ونشكر المقررة الخاصة المعنية بالمدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان.
Thank you, Vice President. We have taken note of the report of the Special Rapporteur, and we thank her for her efforts in drafting this report. We fully agree with the recommendations, in particular those relating to the protection of human rights defenders and the establishment of mechanisms to support them. We are of the view that it is essential to condemn any campaign of insults against human rights defenders. Our Constitution enshrines the freedom of expression, and we have established institutions to uphold this right, as well as all other related rights, such as the freedom of association and assembly, the establishment of trade unions, the right to protest and demonstrate. And so we are of the view that civil society is a partner for states which have a role to play in promoting human rights. We work with human rights defenders by establishing an opening dialogue. We also work with civil society as we are reviewing Law 88/2011 to ensure that greater transparency is provided for the protection of civil society. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, Vice President. Australia welcomes the Special Rapporteur's amplification of human rights defender voices from around the world in her final report as mandate holder. This is more crucial than ever in light of increasing threats, discrimination and violence, including alarming findings by OHCHR that the killing and disappearing of human rights defenders and media workers has reached a record high. This is unacceptable. Despite these significant challenges and increased risk of reprisals for their work, it is inspiring to read in the Special Rapporteur's report that human rights defenders remain committed to the promotion and protection of human rights and continue to seek justice through the multilateral system. Australia shares this commitment. Reform of the UN system must enable the human rights architecture to remain efficient, effective and inclusive of human rights defenders. This is how we support their vital work, and this is how we achieve peace and prosperity for all. Australia thanks the Special Rapporteur for her tireless work over many years. Can you share some practical examples of how states can support human rights defender networks? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Vice President. Ireland aligns with the statement of the EU, and I want to thank also the Special Rapporteur for her report. The work of human rights defenders is indeed crucial for the realisation and protection of human rights, and they drive accountability, inclusivity and justice, often through sheer perseverance and dedication. Special Rapporteur, your report sets out clearly the concerning impacts of a changing international system on human rights defenders' ability to carry out their work. Unprecedented funding cuts, discriminatory legislation and foreign agents laws combine to lead to reduced capacity to provide emergency assistance, psychosocial support, legal aid, outreach, monitoring and documentation. Yet despite this repression, human rights defenders hold firm to the universal values enshrined in international human rights treaties and declarations. The protection of human rights defenders, including the related fight against reprisals, has always been a priority for Ireland. Over 20 years ago, Ireland led the initial process to agree EU guidelines on human rights defenders, which are still in place today. We have chosen to prioritise civil society space and human rights defenders in our campaign for membership of the Human Rights Council. In conclusion, Vice President, I want to express our deep gratitude and appreciation to the Special Rapporteur for her tireless and essential work highlighting the situations of human rights defenders over the 6 years of her mandate, and to wish her well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of North Macedonia.
Mr. Vice President, we thank the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights Defenders for the presentation of her latest report and her work in the past 6 years. North Macedonia recognizes the essential role of the human rights defenders in promoting and protecting human rights. We remain committed to ensuring their full and meaningful participation in public life. We are deeply concerned by the growing restrictions placed on the civic space worldwide. The human rights defenders face intimidation, arbitrary detention, strategic lawsuits against public participation, and, in the most serious cases, enforced disappearances or killings. We condemn all acts of reprisals against human rights defenders. Human rights defenders are indispensable to resilient and democratic society. Their work supports victims, advances accountability, protects the principle of rule of law. They are bedrock of democratic systems that respect human freedoms and dignity. We must intensify efforts to counter strategic lawsuits against the public participation and ensuring a safe and enabling environment for their work, which is a shared responsibility of all states. North Macedonia stresses the importance of addressing gender-specific risks faced by women human rights defenders. As we look ahead, we must recommit to the safeguarding and adequately funding the UN human rights pillar and the work of the human rights defenders. Standing with the human rights defenders means upholding fundamental freedoms, which remain the cornerstone of democratic societies. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Poland.
Mr. Vice President, Poland aligns itself with the EU statement. Poland greatly values the work of the human rights defenders across the globe, done sometimes at the significant personal risk, which becomes considerably heightened in the conflict settings. We thank you, Madam Special Rapporteur, for pointing out various recommendations in your recent report, presenting the voices of defenders against a backdrop of increasing challenges to human rights and the international human rights framework. Poland encourages all states to commit to strengthen the mechanisms desired to monitor and implement international human rights law, including by increasing accountability for violations and reprisals against human rights defenders for engaging with United Nations mechanisms. Let this Council send a clear message. Human rights defenders do not create instability. They reveal the justice. They do not undermine sovereignty. They enforce a social contract between the government and citizens. They are not obstacles to progress. They are architects of the more equitable future. Human rights defenders are not alone. We are convinced that their courage will be met with our solidarity and protection. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Thank you, Vice President. Canada thanks the Special Rapporteur for her report and for her leadership in supporting and protecting human rights defenders worldwide these past 6 years. As your report highlights, human rights defenders confront an increasingly hostile environment globally, marked by rising authoritarianism, shrinking civic space, expanding surveillance, and escalating violence, including killings and disappearances at record levels. These trends erode the rights that human rights defenders rely on to operate safely and effectively. Canada condemns the use of structural and legal measures designed to intimidate and curtail their work, including the misuse of counterterrorism laws and reprisals against those cooperating with the United Nations. Together, states must act urgently. Repeal laws that impede human rights work, defend civic space, counter transnational repression, ensure sustainable and flexible funding, strengthen protection mechanisms, close accountability gaps, and reinforce the integrity of international human rights institutions. Canada reaffirms its resolve to championing their work through supporting rapid emergency assistance and relocation pathways for those at imminent risk and mobilizing to prevent, monitor, and respond to threats. We remain a partner for human rights defenders, including supporting initiatives like the newly established Global Protection Fund, Lighthouse, and the Common Good Cyber Fund to assist those facing violence, threats, and transnational repression. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. Vice President, Sierra Leone thanks the Special Rapporteur for her comprehensive report on the situation of human rights defenders. We're deeply concerned about the increasingly hostile environment that human rights defenders face, which includes reports of killings, arbitrary detentions, harassment, surveillance, and censorship. Misusing laws to silence or stigmatize defenders violates international human rights standards and undermines the rule of law and democratic institutions. Sierra Leone affirms that human rights defenders are vital to accountability, reconciliation, good governance, and sustainable peace. Reprisals against these defenders undermine individual rights and the broader human rights system. As a main sponsor of Human Rights Council Resolution 5910 on civil society space, Sierra Leone agrees that states have a duty to ensure a safe and enabling environment for civil society, both online and offline. Nationally, constitutional protections and ongoing reforms safeguard the freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. We also support UPR recommendations that strengthen civic participation. Human rights defenders play a pivotal role in the international human rights ecosystem. We therefore support the Special Rapporteur's recommendations and call on states to prevent reprisals, ensure accountability for violations, and engage constructively with human rights mechanisms. Sierra Leone is firmly committed to advancing these efforts both domestically and globally. I thank you.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the Special Rapporteur for the comprehensive report and the recommendations which we will take into account. Actors within civil society, such as NGOs and human rights defenders, are instrumental in advancing the betterment of all functioning states by strengthening good governance, social accountability, the justice system, the protection of the environment and human rights, as well as promoting rural development. Our civil and political landscape is continuously evolving. As of October 2025, Cambodia has 6,649 registered associations and NGOs comprising of 2,923 associations, 3,570 NGOs, and 156 associations of minority groups. This reflects the social trust and cohesion between government and non-government infrastructure. Continuous efforts and progress in accordance with our capacity have been made to address the challenges, fostering effective, diverse, credible, transparent, and genuine government-civil society relationship at both national and subnational levels. Lastly, Cambodia remains committed to promoting freedom of association and assembly, as well as the rights of human rights defenders. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Serbia.
Vice President, we thank the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders for the observations in her report and value the opportunity for dialogue. Serbia remains fully committed to the promotion and protection of human rights, both nationally and internationally. From the national perspective, freedom of association is guaranteed by the Constitution and the law on associations, in line with European standards and international norms, which allows associations to operate freely while ensuring transparency and legal certainty. While acknowledging the challenges on the ground, we remain committed to further strengthening our legislative and institutional framework, guided by the principles of objectivity, impartiality, and non-selectivity. We continue our efforts to improve channels of dialogue with the civil society, recognizing the importance of their role in shaping policies and monitoring human and minority rights across national, provincial, and local levels. Madam Special Rapporteur, what would be the best way for improving channels of dialogue with human rights defenders in order to better protect their rights? To conclude, Serbia will remain committed to further engagement with the Special Rapporteur in this area and the international community, including through the Human Rights Council, working together to further enhance the protection of human rights for all. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Mr. Vice President, Indonesia takes note of the Special Rapporteur's work in highlighting the challenges faced by human rights defenders. Their role remains vital in advancing democracy, accountability, and good governance worldwide. Mr. Vice President, the report of the Special Rapporteur has rightly pointed out the unfortunate and troubling double standard in human rights protection. We observe how violations against defenders in many parts of the world provoke strong reactions. Yet there is striking silence when those targeted are human rights defenders advocating for Palestine. Further, we are deeply concerned by the sanctions, labeling, and political pressure directed at the Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory, judges and prosecutors of international courts, and Palestinian human rights defenders for speaking out against illegal occupation and crimes against humanity in Palestine. We are also alarmed by the misuse of civic space, including within this council, particularly by certain actors, to spread defamation, hate speech, and personal attacks against human rights defenders. In this context, we seek the Special Rapporteur's views on how the UN can most effectively address these challenges in the Council to ensure consistent protection for all human rights defenders. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Mr. Vice President, my delegation aligns itself with the statement of the EU. Madam Special Rapporteur, Belgium thanks you for this report, which reflects the degree to which the dedication of human rights defenders remains unshakable despite growing risks. As you indicate, their motivations are primarily conviction in the face of injustice rather than the basis of prior knowledge of human rights norms. We therefore challenge the idea that the defense of human rights is a result of Western influence, and we call on every state to assure their protection. We are deeply concerned by the restrictive legislation impeding access to foreign financing. Moreover, the individual resilience of defenders is undermined when they are already confronted to an emotional burden and an increased risk of exhaustion. It is essential to ensure a safe and conducive environment. Belgium takes note of the limits of the international mechanisms for protecting human rights and pleads for their improvement in terms of access, speed, and impact in complementarity with local initiatives. Madam Special Rapporteur, what means do you recommend to strengthen the protection of human rights defenders and ensure their access to international mechanisms? My country would like to take this opportunity to thank you for your unstinting work, and we would like to express our appreciation to you as well as some optimism. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mauritius.
Mr. Vice President, we thank the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of her report. We recognize the work undertaken by the Special Rapporteur during her mandate in highlighting the essential work of human rights defenders. Mr. Vice President, human rights defenders are an essential cog for the promotion and protection of human rights. They are the first persons to raise alerts on violation and breach of human rights. 38 years after the adoption of a Declaration of Human Rights Defenders, we acknowledge that we still have a long way to go. In this context, we call for an increased collaboration between government entities and civil society actors to promote a public understanding of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. In Mauritius, our constitution guarantees freedom of association, assembly, and expression. The Protection of Human Rights Act serves inter alia as a mechanism for redress. We remain committed to strengthening our legislation and national framework in order to support human rights defenders in their work. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. My delegation thanks Madam Special Rapporteur for her comprehensive report and commends the continued effort throughout the 6-year mandate to identify the challenges faced by human rights defenders and to provide them with appropriate support and protection. We take note of vital role played by human rights defenders as gap fillers in promoting and protecting human rights at all levels. We are deeply concerned that unprecedented challenges arising from funding cuts and the growing threats of intimidation and reprisals faced by human rights defenders, including transnational repression, have hindered their active and effective engagement. In this regard, my delegation notes that the Special Rapporteur's reference to the potential of new and emerging digital technologies, including their practical use by human rights defenders to cope with resources and workload constraints. Building on this observation, we would like to ask which specific reforms or institutional innovations in the use of such technologies the Special Rapporteur considers most urgently needed within UN human rights mechanisms to overcome that procedural accessibility and language barriers identified in the report. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chile.
Vice President, we're grateful to the Special Rapporteur for her report, which offers substantive thinking concerning the structural challenges confronting today human rights defenders, particularly the impact of resource reduction, emergency assistance, psychosocial support, and violation documentation. We'd like to highlight her analysis concerning the accessibility and effectiveness of international protection mechanisms and the urgency of strengthening their response capacity given risk situations. We appreciate the report's emphasis on the core nature of human dignity as a fundamental part of those defending human rights, as well as its analysis concerning the effectiveness and accessibility, as well as follow-up concerning international protection mechanisms. We would like to reiterate our support for this mandate as it comes to an end, and reiterate the importance of working against violence, stigmatization and reprisals against offenders. We'd like to ask in that context, which concrete reforms do you think to be necessary to strengthen the ability of international mechanisms to offer timely and effective protection, particularly in the face of intimidation tactics and reprisals when people cooperate with the UN? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Mr. Vice President, we thank the Special Rapporteur for her report. India appreciates the important role played by human rights defenders in our democratic polity, contributing to its open, pluralistic and inclusive framework. We have always condemned instances of harassment, intimidation, smear campaigns and attacks against human rights defenders and their family members. India is committed to ensuring a safe working environment for people engaged in the promotion and protection of human rights, and our legislative and executive measures are shaped to realize that goal. These are backed by strong, independent institutions, including a robust judiciary. Our National Human Rights Commission has a dedicated 24/7 focal point for receiving and examining complaints, and is also empowered to take suo motu cognizance of cases of human rights violations. Further, human rights defenders can also approach the judiciary. At the same time, we believe that the activities of human rights defenders should be in conformity with the laws of the land, as all citizens are equal before the law. It is in this context that we view the references to India in the SR's report. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Japan thanks the Special Rapporteur for her report and for her continued effort to address the situation of human rights defenders. Civil society actors, including human rights defenders, are a cornerstone of the effective implementation of human rights treaty, ensuring accountability and strengthening the rule of law in every society. Japan strongly condemns threat, harassment, violence, and intimidation and reprisal, including transnational repression against human rights defenders and other civil society actors. Such actions undermine the international human rights framework and have a chilling effect on civil society worldwide. We particularly oppose all acts of intimidation and reprisal against individuals or groups for their cooperation with United Nations human rights mechanism, including the special procedure mandate holder. We believe that the contribution and engagement of civil society actors, including human rights defenders, are essential to promotion and protection of human rights at both national and international level. In particular, meaningful participation in this council is integral to ensuring fruitful discussion. Japan recalls that in accordance with international human rights standards, all states must respect and protect human rights and refrain from permitting, facilitating, or condoning acts of intimidation and reprisal, including transnational repression. We reiterate our firm commitment to protecting civic space so that civil society actors can contribute to the advancement of human rights. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We take note of the report of the Special Rapporteur highlighting challenges faced by the human rights defenders and the adverse impact of global funding constraints on the human rights ecosystem. Mr. Vice President, the democratic progress of our country has been shaped by a vibrant civil society, a progressively widening civic space, and impactful advocacy by non-government organizations. Bangladesh acknowledges the important role that human rights defenders play in advancing accountability, social justice, and inclusive development. Accordingly, we value and encourage constructive engagement by civil society representatives and NGOs in the deliberations of the international mechanisms, including the Human Rights Council. Bangladesh underscores that effectiveness of international mechanisms in supporting human rights defenders largely depends on impartiality, objectivity, and respect for the principle of non-selectivity. Furthermore, international mechanisms should not substitute national processes. Strengthening technical cooperation, capacity building, and dialogue will yield more durable outcomes than approaches perceived as confrontational. We acknowledge the report's discussions on funding constraints and the challenges faced by the civil society organizations. Sustainable and transparent funding frameworks are important. However, such arrangements must operate in accordance with national laws and regulations to ensure accountability and to prevent misuse. Finally, Bangladesh reaffirms its commitment
to... Thank you. This was the last speaker we could accommodate for this dialogue. We shall now turn to the list of speakers for national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative from Bolivia, Defensor del Pueblo, intervention by video.
President, distinguished members of the Council, in my capacity as Ombudsman of the plurinational states of Bolivia, I would like to raise the alarm concerning the state of environmental rights and the persecution of environmental defenders, notwithstanding that Bolivia recognizes the right to life and environmental sustainability. The risks of violation are very clear. Water pollution, forest degradation, and habitat destruction are realities, as well as the criminalization of the activity of environmental defenders. In 2024, we documented 242 violations of environmental rights and 114 violations against environmental rights defenders. In 2025, until November, there were 302 cases against indigenous peoples. In this context, it's essential that we begin a reflection process concerning our vision of sustainable development, prioritizing environmental rights and Mother Earth, consolidating the adjustments required under the Escazú Agreement, and establishing conditions guaranteeing environmental defense as an act warranting protection, not persecution, and that we consolidate the establishment of an implementation committee for the Escazú Agreement to create the design of public policies essential in environmental rights and the protection of Mother Earth. We reaffirm our commitment for the defense of these rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative from Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, intervention by video.
Engaged President, members of the Human Rights Council, and the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defender, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission takes note of the report of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. Human rights defenders, including journalists, document human rights violations, inform the public, and voice the needs of affected communities. We welcome the 2021 Media Proclamation, which expanded media space and strengthened legal protection for journalists, including safeguards against pre-trial and arbitrary detention. However, we are concerned about instances of threats and intimidation of journalists, media managers, and sources, as well as cases of unlawful pre-trial detention. repeated warnings, suspension of licenses, and orders to remove published content by the Media Regulatory Authority adversely impacted independent reporting. Recent amendments to the 2021 Media Proclamation could further undermine the media regulatory body's independence and reverse gains in press freedom. We underscore the importance of ensuring a safe and enabling environment for human rights defenders, including journalists, to operate without fear of reprisal. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative from the State of Palestine, the Independent Commission for Human Rights Intervention by Video.
President, we thank the Special Rapporteur for her important report and recommendations aimed at strengthening protection for human rights defenders and addressing reprisals. In the occupied Palestinian territory, these concerns are deeply relevant. Palestinian human rights defenders face systematic Israeli restrictions, including the designation of civil society organizations as terrorist entities, office raids, movement limitations, administrative detention, and ongoing threats, particularly in Gaza. We also note with serious concern the sanctions imposed in 2025 by the government of the United States against 3 prominent Palestinian human rights organizations for seeking accountability before the International Criminal Court. Given the central role of the United States in the global financial system, such measures can effectively isolate organizations from banking services and funding channels, severely impairing their ability to operate. Penalizing defenders for engaging with international justice mechanisms undermines accountability and weakens the credibility of the international human rights system. The Palestinian context is therefore a critical test for the implementation of this report's recommendations. We call for concrete international measures to protect Palestinian human rights defenders. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the last NHRI we are able to accommodate for this debate. I now give the floor to the International Federation for Human Rights League. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Observatory for the Protection of Human Rights Defenders of FIDH and OMCT commends the sustained action of the Special Rapporteur over the past 6 years. Her final report could not be more timely. As the rules-based order continues to erode, it is critical to hear directly from human rights defenders about the extent of funding restrictions and their impact, how to make the values of the international framework more enforceable, and how to support defenders so that their work is safe and sustainable. Defenders play a key role in building societies that are more equal, peaceful, inclusive, and respectful of the environment, as this mandate has shown. However, worldwide, NGOs are being obstructed, international connections are being cut. Defenders continue to be slandered, threatened, forced into exile, surveilled online and offline, criminalized, and targeted by transnational repression. As the UN faces increased financial and political pressures, sustained support from member states and HRD protection diplomacy are more crucial than ever. Throughout her mandate, the Special Rapporteur has shown unwavering commitment to cooperating with NGOs and defenders in taking up cases and following up with national authorities, ultimately contributing to the release of HRDs, tackling judicial harassment, and improving their security situations. She has also built important bridges with states, demonstrating how essential continued good faith engagement with this mandate is. Madam Special Rapporteur, your determination and solidarity will leave a lasting mark on this mandate. We thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Right Livelihood Award Foundation.
Mr. Vice President, Right Livelihood delivers this statement on behalf of human rights defenders currently living in exile from Belarus, Nicaragua, Iran, Russia, China, Guatemala, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Afghanistan, reflecting the expanding global reality of exile within today's civic space landscape. For many defenders, exile is not protection, but displacement under pressure. Engagement with international mechanisms and peaceful human rights work increasingly leads to forced relocation, continued surveillance, and reprisals. Defenders often face precarious legal status, economic insecurity, and isolation, all while striving to continue their work. Exile does not mark the end of repression. Rather, it represents a transformation of risk. Despite these challenges, defenders remain active, yet without structural support, exile is becoming an erosion of civic space beyond borders.
protection responses remain fragmented, reactive, and insufficient to address exile as a long-term condition of human rights defense. Mr. Vice President, we thank the Special Rapporteur for her important work advancing the protection of human rights defenders, and we hope her successor will continue to address the growing risks and realities of exile. In this spirit, we call on the mandate to consider preparing a dedicated thematic report on human rights defenders in exile, outlining concrete pathways towards durable protection frameworks. Special Rapporteur, as exile becomes an increasingly common consequence of civic engagement, how does your mandate envision strengthening long-term systems that ensure defenders in exile can remain protected, visible, and safely engaged? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peace Brigades International.
Señora relatora, las personas defensoras.
Rapporteur, human rights defenders carry out their work robustly in an increasingly complex context. The law on female searchers in Colombia reflects the complex context there. In Guatemala, the community journalist Norma Sancir was handed down, or obtained rather, a key ruling that protected her as a community indigenous defender. In Mexico, the Environmental Secretariat has been incorporated into the protection mechanism. In Kenya, social justice centres have achieved the limitation of extrajudicial executions. We carry out our work in the context of financial crisis, prioritising the essential. Funders must support these initiatives defined by defenders themselves. As highlighted, states must support protection networks and adopt protection policies. In Colombia, it's urgent to implement the collective roadmaps, including Decree 616. In Guatemala, the protection policy requires trained staff and resources. In Mexico, we must strengthen the system, taking on board recent recommendations. In Kenya, it's essential to include psychosocial support, public recognition, and collective measures. In addition to protection mechanisms, we must consider transnational support. The dissemination of communications by special procedures on more visible and more accessible platforms is a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative from Article 19, the International Center Against Censorship Intervention by Video.
Article 19 commends the Special Rapporteur for her report, which reminds us of the courage of human rights defenders worldwide amid detrimental attacks on civic space. Across the world, human rights defenders face extreme threats for their work. The rise of transnational repression is also having existential impacts, leaving many human rights defenders and their families without refuge from the grip of repressive regimes. These wholesale attacks on human rights defenders now coincide with cataclysmic funding cuts to the whole human rights ecosystem. These cuts first came from the United States, and now many other governments worldwide. As Article 19's upcoming report on the impact of the US cuts show, the consequences for civil society have been immediate and immense. Mass uncertainty, widespread job losses, the shuttering of critical programs, organizations and initiatives, many built up over decades. In particular, the cuts have decimated large swathes of global efforts to defend freedom of expression. The impact on protection work means the world is a more dangerous place now than it was for human rights defenders a year ago. Despite these challenges, human rights defenders continue to have faith in the multilateral system. States must now not only actively demonstrate their commitment to the multilateral human rights system, but ensure that it is more credible, inclusive, and responsive to the demands of human rights defenders worldwide. As part of these efforts, they must urgently fund work to protect human rights defenders, including more predictable and flexible core funding that allows civil society to rebuild, reinvent, and reconfigure to meet the challenges of our time. Special Rapporteur, Article 19 takes this opportunity to thank you for your invaluable contributions to the protection of human rights defenders over the last 6 years. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Human Rights House Foundation.
Thank you, Vice President. Human Rights House Foundation thanks the Special Rapporteur for her reports and, as this is the final dialogue for mandate, thanks her for her consistent and principled engagement with civil society, including HRHF. Vice President, the Special Rapporteur's report on Bosnia and Herzegovina captures the resilience of defenders and the risks they face across the country. We are concerned by the chilling effect of restrictive legislation in Republika Srpska, including the recriminalization of defamation. We are also concerned by public narratives that stigmatize defenders and normalize hostility, and by the use of slaps. We urge authorities at all levels to implement the Special Rapporteur's recommendations, including repealing criminal defamation provisions, preventing slaps, strengthening protection for journalists and defenders, and ensuring prompt, impartial investigations into threats and violence. We also encourage the Council of Ministers to address its state-level strategy by making an enabling environment for civil society a central objective, and to establish a formal civil society advisory board to support meaningful implementation. Vice President, we ask the Special Rapporteur, what should Bosnia and Herzegovina do to make protection measures for defenders trusted and effective, so threats are reported and acted upon? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of International Service for Human Rights.
Thank you, President. Madam Special Rapporteur, ISHR welcomes the commitment that you have shown in protecting human rights defenders throughout your mandate, especially given the democratic space that is shrinking in several countries of the world, which has had a significant impact on the legal protection, physical and digital safety, and the funding of defenders. You also show in your report what mitigations and special recommendations might exist to help them. You also stated in your report that defenders continue to be marginalized. This is the case of Moussa Changari in Niger, Komlan Tosuki in Benin, and others in other countries. They are even restricted from participating in the work of the African Commission on Human Rights. Despite several of these acts were carried out by state actors and non-state actors to silence criticism against those working to protect their fundamental rights. We urge you to extend this mandate, therefore, unanimously during this session, and we hope that there will be a continuation of the cooperation with regional human rights mechanisms. Madam Special Rapporteur, what is the principal lesson to be drawn from your 6 years as Rapporteur? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Commission of the Churches on International Affairs of the World Council of Churches for a joint statement via video.
We thank the Special Rapporteur for her report and welcome the recommendation to strengthen protection frameworks for defenders. We remain deeply concerned about shrinking civic space in the Philippines. The country ranks highest in Asia for individuals killed or disappeared in the context of their work protecting land and environmental rights. Indigenous women defenders who expose human rights and environmental abuses linked to extractive projects on indigenous lands face greater risks, including threats, criminalisation, unlawful killings, and enforced disappearances. The law is systematically weaponised against legitimate dissent. The 2012 Terrorism Financing Prevention and Suppression Act and the 2020 Anti-Terrorism Act are used to freeze access to financial resources. The practice of red tagging continues to be employed to intimidate defenders through arbitrary surveillance and criminal charges. Accountability remains elusive for families of victims of the war on drugs. More than 6,000 victims have been officially recorded with only 5 convictions. While we welcome criminal proceedings against former President Rodrigo Duterte at the International Criminal Court, this accountability is not replicated domestically. We urge the government of the Philippines to immediately abolish the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, adopt the Human Rights Defenders Protection Act without delay, ensure independent and swift investigation into cases of unlawful killings. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Gulf Center for Human Rights Limited.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. On behalf of Al-Qusd for Human Rights and Gulf Center for Human Rights, we'd like to thank the Special Rapporteur for the final report of her mandate and take the opportunity to thank her for her tireless efforts during the last 6 years. Dear Mary, your efforts have been truly appreciated by so many within the human rights community. Despite severe restrictions on and repression of human rights defenders in the MENA region, your report outlines the powerful motivations and spirit that keep human rights defenders going. Across the world, you note that human rights defenders often start their activism based on personal experiences. This shows a universality to the reaction against injustice and human rights violations. Across MENA, in particular the Gulf and neighboring states, any criticism of the authorities is immediately silenced through threats and prosecution. Even if released, they can face travel bans and being forced into silence. Thus, most of the free voices are the members of the diasporas in countries where it is safer to speak out. In many cases, they operate on tiny budgets where only deep commitment keeps the core of their activities going. Even there, they suffer transnational repression in many forms, including Interpol arrest warrants, extradition when traveling, digital surveillance, online reputational attacks, as well as pressure and travel bans on family. This report outlines the impact of funding cuts by states who support human rights and have provided much of the funding. The consequences outlined are only the beginning, and along with cuts to the UN itself, will lead to less human rights capacity worldwide. Madam Special Rapporteur, among your comprehensive recommendations to states, which ones are the ones you would highlight as needed to enhance the protection of human rights defenders? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety. Intervention by video.
For Reporters' Freedom and Safety raises urgent concern regarding acts of transnational repression against Azerbaijani human rights defenders and journalists in exile, in particular Emin Huseynov, who currently resides in Geneva. The situation significantly escalated after Mr. Huseynov addressed President Ilham Aliyev and Vice President Mehriban Aliyeva at the Munich Security Conference regarding ongoing repression against government critics in Azerbaijan. Just days later, on 18 February 2026, in the middle of Geneva, Mr. Huseynov was followed by two reportedly armed individuals, allegedly of Azerbaijani origin. He believes that only his decision to live stream the situation prevented a potentially deadly attack. On 20 February, near the UN office in Geneva, two unidentified individuals were surveilling his vehicle and planned what appeared to be a coordinated abduction attempt. Since then, Emir reports ongoing surveillance by suspicious individuals and vehicles with foreign license plates, and expresses concern about possible monitoring of his electronic devices and vehicle. Myself, I constantly receive death threats and coordinated intimidation campaign on social media in response to my public activities. We call on the UN Special Rapporteur and the Human Rights Council to ensure that these attacks are investigated and to take concrete steps to prevent further acts of intimidation and transnational repression against human rights defenders engaging with the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Frontline AIDS Limited.
The
cause of human rights in Africa is seriously undermined when defenders are silenced by threats, intimidation, political pressure, and restrictive laws governing NGOs and the freedom of expression, as well as insecurity linked to armed conflict, and so on. Actors defending sensitive causes, including the rights of women and LGBTI people, remain particularly vulnerable, often without a legal framework for protection, as in Cameroon, and are exposed to political arbitrariness and social pressures. Particular attention must be paid to their safety. In Senegal, a bill to strengthen the crackdown on homosexuality by increasing penalties and criminalizing the apology or promotion of same-sex relations creates a climate of fear and could restrict the work of NGOs, journalists, and human rights defenders. We urge African states to adopt and implement specific legislation protecting human rights defenders, to strengthen constitutional guarantees of fundamental freedoms, and to demonstrate a real and sustainable political will to ensure a safe and pluralistic civic space.
Thank you. This was the last speaker we could accommodate for this dialogue. I now give the floor to Mrs. Lawler for her concluding remarks. You have 6 minutes and 30 seconds.
I better gallop through, sorry. So thank you all very much. It's very interesting to listen to you. Sometimes I think I'm in Wonderland. And what I heard today was a mixture of truth and lies. Some concrete efforts I want to applaud that are making headway to protect human rights defenders. But a lot of smoke screening, a lot of reputational damage limitation, that kind of thing. You all know what you have to do. It's not rocket science. You have to have laws, policies, procedures in place to protect human rights defenders. You have to find some spine when it comes to political will. You have to develop independent protection by yourselves, regardless of your enemies or friends. It basically comes down to don't dump on your enemies just. You have to dump on your friends as well. So, the subordination of values is really incredible. So, tell me 3 minutes beforehand. So I have millions of notes because I have a superb team. There's Orsi and Angelica and Ed and thing down there. And they write in all your questions and they suggest answers. Now, I can give you a transcript afterwards if you like, because there's no way I'm going to get through this. But I am shocked by reprisals, Palestine, Ireland, UN Women, Indonesia and Chile. And, you know, if you invite people to address the Council or the General Assembly, you have to work with the defenders to put in place security measures to allow their participation, both before, during and afterwards. And it is really dreadful that the sanctions that were mentioned against Palestinian NGOs, the ICC is a core accountability mechanism. Efforts to undermine it and intimidate it are abhorrent, and special rapporteurs should never be sanctioned either for carrying out their mandates. My good friends, China, you pop up every year and you say the same thing every year. And you know I have a great affection for China because my mother was born there. I was there last time 15 years ago by myself, but you wouldn't invite me, so I couldn't go back. But you turn up every day, every year, and say the same thing. It seems to me that just today I received word of a seriously ill human rights defender, Yang Li. She's being denied urgent medical treatment, and in what seems to be retaliation for her human rights. I also want to, not just China, but there are 96 cases of human rights defenders whose imprisonment, long-term sentences over 10 years that I've been following since I started the mandate, and those people shouldn't be in prison. The other, one of my other priorities, killings. I heard yesterday about the killing of a woman human rights defender, Yana Mohammed from Iraq, and she had contributed to my report on women human rights defenders, peace and security. And it's 10 years since Bertha was assassinated. Mexico, I know that you're doing the protection mechanism, but, you know, we've had Marcelo Pérez and Simon Pedro Lopez assassinated in Chiapas, and the authors have never been identified, and they have to. I'm also calling for the release of Versailles Velasco Garcia, because he has been given a 58-year sentence I'm just back from Chiapas, you know, where there's organised crime, local corrupt officials and big business. I can't say any more because I have a message for human rights defenders. But as I said, I can talk to you privately if you wish afterwards. Because I can't go without a word to human rights defenders. Over the course of my life, human rights defenders have been my friends, my heroes, and the source and belief that little by little, and even sometimes quickly, suddenly, positive change happens. There have been challenges, but there have also been many victories. And your work, both the dogged, unrelenting struggle and the victories, lay the foundation for a more just and equal world, for future generations, as the Charter says, for your children, for my children, Christopher, Ilana and Marissa, and for our grandchildren, in my case, Solomon and Sue. Have to give them a kiss. As Pericles said, what you leave behind is not engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others. Dear human rights defenders, you have been and you are continuously wounded by your experiences, yet your hearts are still hungry for justice, Listen to your heart, because in your heart lies the beating of your heart, lies the hope for humanity. Finally, one of the cases I have always followed is my friend, human rights defender and lawyer, Mohammed al-Rakan in the United Arab Emirates. He was convicted on baseless charges, given 12 years. When that was up, he was re-sentenced to life imprisonment. His joy and sense of fun remain with me constantly. And I beg you, any of you who can do something, please try and secure his release. And I leave you with a quote from him. He said, "I am an optimist at heart. I imagine our future is built on this idea of human rights and its culture. He who feels he does not live in a free society that makes him feel equal to others will feel that his humanity is incomplete. There is a saying that between the river and the rock, the river always wins, not because of its strength, but because of its persistence. Those working for human rights are not strong, but they have perseverance." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lawler. This brings us to the end of this interactive dialogue. Ms. Mary Lawler, as your mandate as a Special Rapporteur comes to an end, I wish to take this opportunity to express, on behalf of the Council, our deep gratitude for the valuable contributions you have made to the work of the Council and to wish you every success in your future endeavours. We'll now take a short technical break before proceeding with the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights. We will now begin the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights. Let me welcome the mandate holder, Mrs. Alexandra Zantaki. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. I now give the floor to Mrs. Zantaki to present her reports.
Thank you very much. Dear esteemed delegates, today I present you 3 reports, 2 country visits and 1 thematic report. In November 2024, I visited the Lao People's Democratic Republic. The government has adopted as priority objectives to reduce poverty through economic development and to improve the livelihoods of people. A high priority is placed on developing access to crucial infrastructure and essential services in the areas of health, water, sanitation, food and education, in particular for remote communities. Unfortunately, I found that cultural diversity, an essential element of cultural rights, is not articulated by the state. In the state's policies and practices to foster development and improve the livelihoods of people, a cultural rights approach is lacking. Cultural impact assessments are not carried out, with important consequences for the most marginalized. In particular, the impact of resettlement policies on cultural rights, including ways of life tied to lands, is overlooked. The government requires inhabitants to adhere to a cultural model that is presented as civilized rather than backward, with all the prejudices and discriminations this carries. There is a system of assimilation of ethnic groups into the main Lao Thai group through various policies and laws. The cultural engineering put in place by the authorities, which shapes cultural dynamics for a transformation of society in the name of development, is problematic, to the extent that in Laos it does not really rely on a participatory and democratic process, does not tolerate opposition to the models set out, is based on a biased attitude towards ethnic groups, and promotes conformity to prescribed models. The right of people to meaningfully take part in the decision-making processes that have an impact on their cultural rights is largely reduced to information and mitigation processes, far from the right to free, prior and informed consent that they should enjoy. Development partners are not without their own responsibility. They should also carefully abide by their international obligations to not support projects that contribute to human rights violations, for example, through assimilation policies or the lack of real and meaningful participation of communities affected by development or nature conservation projects. At the same time, one has to applaud Laos, the Lao authorities who underlined to me their dedication to cultural rights, recognizing them as vital for the country's national identity, and the rich diversity that exists of its 50 ethnic groups. Cultural rights are enshrined in the Constitution, something of a rarity among states, and the states committed to the principle of non-discrimination. I hope such a principle will be expanded to comply with international human rights law. I would like to express my appreciation that Laos accepting me to visit them as an expression of the government's renewed commitment to the United Nations human rights system. In June 2025, I had the chance of being the first UN Special Rapporteur to visit the Federated States of Micronesia. I thank the government for its invitation and for engaging in this process. I was grateful for the opportunity of visiting 3 out of the 4 states of FSM. In doing so, I covered a lot of ground and could reliably monitor cultural rights in the state. I congratulate FSM for choosing to focus on cultural rights as a set of human rights obligations that can help leverage the unique cultural assets of its peoples to guide the country in its development process. During my visit and in my report, I praised various aspects of the cultural ecosystem. I strongly believe that the country has much to teach about solidarity and about creating and maintaining a sense of belonging and of common good. Multiple places exist for active participation in cultural life, heritage, the arts and sports, many community-led. My report proposes the ratification of both covenants and the ratification of the UNESCO 2005 Convention on the Diversity of Cultural Expressions as means to provide more solid guarantees for cultural rights. I encourage the government to continue its efforts towards increasing knowledge about cultural rights across the country. In my report, I also highlighted a lack of communication and lack of coherence among the various levels of public authorities, especially the federal level and the traditional authorities. But my main concern is that cultural self-determination has not yet fully materialized in this ongoing transitional period from a trust territory to independence. Cultural rights will be strengthened by a strong vision of Micronesia's own development that still has to be fleshed out. Human rights are not always seen, and certainly not by all, as a tool to achieve the potential of all FSM inhabitants, but as external interference. And when opposing with what is seen as traditional values, they tend to be ignored. Restrictions on human rights can never be justified in the name of culture. I encourage the government and the people of FSM to continue affirming their sovereignty by fully embracing their human rights obligations and by seeking diverse regional and international cooperation and alliances. In both states, nature conservation is an important issue, and each state has a different approach to it. I benefited a lot from visiting these two countries in understanding the issue of nature conservation and cultural rights, and I thank all the people I spoke to who engaged and enhanced my knowledge of the issue. Since my previous report to the Human Rights Council, I have either led or joined 86 communications related to alleged cultural rights violations, addressed to 34 countries and 32 other actors. Repeatedly, victims have said that their cultural rights are compromised or ignored in the name of nature conservation. The serious human rights violations that the model of fortress conservation is having has been talked about widely in this forum by two previous special rapporteurs on the environment and human rights, by the SR on climate change, by special rapporteurs on indigenous peoples. You see, that's why special rapporteurs are such great value to the UN human rights system. Yet, several states and NGOs on conservation and international organizations seem to insist to work on the basis that biodiversity can be separated from cultural diversity, that somehow we can protect the forest by prohibiting the people who have been living in this forest for thousands of years to continue to do so. Cultural rights require us to depart from this single narrative at last and adopt a multi-perspective approach. Conservation projects have been weaponized to dispossess groups of their lands, territories and resources, and disconnect them from their cultural sites, their ways of life, and land and water-based cultural practices. I have heard this in many parts of the world, where villagers have been pushed out in order for the state to create national parks, often for tourism. Individuals' and groups' visions and priorities are completely ignored under the conservation banner. But their visions, priorities, and cosmotheories are elements of their cultures, and by ignoring them, states violate cultural rights that they have agreed to respect. Conservation projects conveniently push aside the cultural importance of conservation sites for the individuals and the shared identity of people. Time and time again, communities complain that they have not taken part in decision-making processes regarding development projects that have an impact on their lives, that such decisions have been taken in a top-down approach without their true involvement, often through using science that means nothing to them and has no regard for their own experience of nurturing the nature that somehow now they're asked to abandon. States have agreed to allow everyone to participate in cultural life. This includes respecting the rights of affected groups to take part in decision-making processes that have an impact on their cultural life. This means also recognizing the right of free, prior and informed consent of indigenous peoples and local communities. International organizations have been complicit in funding attempts for nature conservation that violate cultural rights. The work of UNESCO in the field of heritage has gradually shifted towards the integration of natural and cultural resources. I am happy to see that after many years of fruitless discussions between the Special Rapporteur, the United Republic of Tanzania and UNESCO regarding the management of the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, which has led to resettlement, forced evictions, home demolitions and additional restrictions on the livelihood of local populations in the name of nature conservation, finally UNESCO are starting to engage in the discussion. The Maasai pastoralists, numbering more than 82,000 people, have not been consulted about the plans, and their physical and cultural survival remains in danger. States also have an obligation to protect against cultural rights violations committed by non-state conservation actors, such as conservation NGOs and donors. Donor states or organizations can no more pretend that they have no responsibility over the cultural rights violations happening in their funded projects. They must pause any project that adopts a fortress conservation approach, and they must stop having merely tick-boxing exercises regarding effective participation. To this end, I am happy that this report has opened a channel of communication with Germany, one of the major donors in conservation, on the work of their National Development Agency, GIZ, in many parts of the world. So what is the way forward? Noting that what I said is not groundbreaking, any conservation discussion or action must identify its impact on the ways of life, activities, practices and traditions, sciences, spirituality, cosmotheories and priorities of the people affected, and must act to involve them in the process. But this continues not to be the case. So I do urge, once again, states and IGOs and NGOs to make this now a priority. Thank you very much. Looking forward to our discussions.
Thank you. According to our practice, we will start by hearing from the delegations of the countries concerned. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. You have 5 minutes.
Mr. Vice President, my delegation wishes to thank Mrs. Alexandra Sandaki, Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, for her presentation of the report following her visit to the Lao PDR in November 2024. We appreciate the Special Rapporteur's assessment of the state of the cultural rights, highlighting the Lao government's efforts to promote and protect human rights, including cultural rights, enjoyed by all ethnic groups in accordance with our constitution and national legislation. The Lao government has always attached great importance to the promotion and protection of cultural rights, including safeguarding the cultural heritage and tradition of the nation and of each of the 50 ethnic groups. These ethnic communities live harmoniously and free from discrimination, participate equally and meaningfully in the national socio-economic development, and benefit directly and equitably from the development outcomes. The Lao government continues to make concerted efforts to reduce poverty, improve living conditions, and promote the livelihoods and fight traditional practices of all ethnic groups. While appreciating the objective assessment in some areas in the report, we note with concern that several sections contain inaccurate or misleading information regarding the government policies, legislation, and the situation on the ground. The Lao government provided detailed responses and clarifications for inclusion in the final version of the report, but these were unfortunately not reflected. Vice President, inviting mandate holders to visit the Lapidia, including the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, demonstrate our consistent commitment to cooperation with the mechanisms of Human Rights Council, particularly the special procedures. My delegation regrets to observe that despite the good will of the Laos government and our good cooperation and facilitation for the visit by the Special Rapporteur, including the arrangement of meetings with the relevant central and local authorities, the field trips in 2 provinces, and meetings with local people, the Special Rapporteur chose to rely largely on information from external sources, which are not only unreliable, but also in many cases hostile to the Laopedia. My delegation calls upon the Special Rapporteur to study further and bear in mind the information she received from government sources and from her meetings during the visit to make her report more objective, accurate, factual, and thus acceptable. Mr. Vice President, we reaffirm the importance of sustained constructive engagement with the special procedures and other mechanisms of the Human Rights Council. We recognize the important role of the mandate holders in promoting and protecting human rights. At the same time, the credibility and effectiveness of special procedures system depend on professionalism, integrity, impartiality, and accountability. All mandate holders must uphold the principle of objectivity, non-selectivity, transparency, and avoidance of double standard and politicization, while strictly adhering to their respective mandates. Mr. Vice President, the Lapidia remain committed to open and constructive dialogue based on mutual respect, good faith, and full respect for the sovereignty of state. My delegation stands ready to continue working with the Special Rapporteur and her team and to provide any additional information or clarification that might assist in fostering a more accurate understanding of the situation in our country. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Federated States of Micronesia. You have 5 minutes.
Mr. Vice President, Micronesia expresses its sincere appreciation to the United Nations Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, Professor Alexandra Sanzanki, for her official visit to the FSM from June 2nd to 13, 2025, and for the comprehensive report presented to this Council. My government reaffirms its steadfast commitment to the promotion and protection of cultural rights as an integral component of human rights in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and the Constitution of the FSM. As a nation composed of diverse island communities and distinct languages, traditions, and customary practices, we recognize culture as the foundation of our identity, social cohesion, and sustainable development. Our constitutional framework reflects respect for traditional authority, religious freedom, and the preservation of customary values alongside democratic governance. We acknowledge the observations of the Special Rapporteur regarding the complexities of our federation, where responsibilities are shared among national, state, and traditional authorities. While this structure reflects our history and social organization, we recognize the challenges it may pose for the uniform implementation of international human rights commitments. However, the government remains committed to strengthening coordination among all levels of governance to ensure that no community or vulnerable group is left behind. The Federated States of Micronesia is also facing significant demographic and economic pressures, including population decline due largely to migration under the Compact of Free Association with the United States, the loss of skilled workers and knowledge holders has implications for the transmission of cultural heritage and community resilience. We are therefore intensifying efforts to safeguard indigenous knowledge, traditional navigation, arts, and local languages for future generations. We share the Special Rapporteur's concern regarding threats to cultural heritage sites, including Nanmadol and the World War II shipwrecks in Chuk Lagoon, which face environmental degradation, resource constraints, and the impacts of climate change. These sites are invaluable to our national identity, to humanity as a whole, and we call for strengthened international cooperation to support their preservation. In the field of education, the government recognizes the importance of ensuring that curricula reflect Micronesian history, languages, and traditional knowledge, fostering cultural pride and a sense of belonging among our youth. We also acknowledge the need to promote gender equality, youth participation, and the inclusion of persons with disabilities in cultural and community life, consistent with our national priorities and capacities. Mr. Vice President, the climate change poses an enduring threat not only to our territory, but also to our cultural survival. Rising sea levels endanger sacred sites, traditional practices, and ways of life that define who we are as a people. We therefore urge the international community to recognize the inseparable relationship between culture, environment, and human rights, and to enhance global cooperation to protect the heritage and identity of small island developing states. While the government welcomes the recommendations of the Special Rapporteur, their implementation will be undertaken in accordance with our Constitution, national laws, and development priorities. We support continued dialogue and technical assistance to strengthen our capacity to advance cultural rights in a manner consistent with our national context. The Federated States of Micronesia thanks the Special Rapporteur for her constructive engagement and ensures this Council that the recommendations will be carefully considered at the highest policy levels. I thank you.
Thank you. The list of speakers is now closed. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture we'll have to suspend the debate and move on to the next item, which is rights of reply. I understand that certain delegations have requested to exercise the right of reply. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China. You have 3 minutes.
Mr. Vice President, China is exercising its right of reply to answer certain allegations made by certain NGOs during their dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on torture, to the effect that torture exists in Xinjiang. Torture is considered a serious criminal offense in China and is explicitly prohibited by Chinese legislation. We have a comprehensive legal system to fight torture. Some organizations misuse the Human Rights Council as a forum to fabricate and disseminate false information in order to defame and accuse China. China firmly opposes this and categorically rejects these activities. China also responds to allegations made by some countries during their dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the freedom of religion, to the effect that the freedom of funeral rites is violated in Xinjiang and in Tibet. The respect and protection of the freedom of religion is a fundamental principle to which China has adhered for a long time. The government of China protects normal and legitimate religious activities under the regulation of religious affairs and other relevant laws and regulations. China firmly opposes and condemns most vigorously the defamation campaign conducted by certain NGOs against China, as well as their interference in the internal affairs of China. Everyone must respect and apply the law equally. The human rights defenders must not benefit from a special treatment or special rights. So, Mr. Vice President, China insists on a constructive dialogue with all parties founded on equality and mutual respect. Some countries, based on false, partial, or entirely fabricated information, level unjustified accusations against China on human rights with a view to distracting international attention from their own record in that matter. Some organizations have held hostile prejudices against China for a long time and are unable to comprehend the human rights situation in a global and objective fashion. We call on countries and organizations concerned to stop politicizing human rights and to genuinely engage with a view to the harmonious development of the international cause of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India. You have 3 minutes.
Mr. Vice President, India is compelled to exercise its right of reply in response to references made by Pakistan during the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion and belief. Such baseless attempts to tarnish India's civilizational ethos is a gross misuse of this platform. India, where ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities have thrived and held the highest positions in politics, business, and society, where freedom of religion and belief is reflected in city landscapes replete with spires and minarets and gopurams of every conceivable kind, is beyond the understanding of this terror state, which is built on religious intolerance, bigotry, and a systemic oppression of its own people. This is the same country where, contrary to the precepts of freedom of religion and belief, Ahmadiyya community has not only been ostracized from every walk of society through a constitutional amendment, but where blasphemy laws are weaponized for their subjugation, and that of religious and sectarian minorities. The dwindling minority populations in Pakistan are a testament to decades of fear and state-sponsored repression. Of 1,285 worship sites for Hindus and 532 Sikh gurdwaras, a mere 37 remain functional. That too as per their own estimates. The actual situation on the ground is starker. The framing of religious identities in pejorative terms in their own statement establishes the deep hatred and antipathy they hold for their own minorities. We are well aware, Mr. Vice President, that the modus operandi of this country is to provoke us and get whatever little attention it can draw to itself through our response. It is also a deflection mechanism to avoid accountability for all the grave injustices and human rights violations it has been committing against its minorities. But we continue to respond. We respond because we want the world to understand the absurdities that this country peddles in the Council and its egregious human rights violations as it continues to erode the credibility of these discussions. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Latvia. You have 3 minutes.
Mr. Vice President, Latvia wishes to exercise its right of reply in response to the statements delivered by the representatives of the Russian Federation. Latvia is a state governed by the rule of law. Our courts are independent and impartial, and the separation of powers is a functional constitutional principle, not a rhetorical claim. Latvia chooses law over arbitrariness, dialogue over division, and unity based on shared democratic values. Against this background, we firmly reject attempts to instrumentalize individual cases adjudicated in Latvia, including the cases of Mr. Gaponenko and Mr. Gushchin referred to by the Russian Federation. Independent international assessments consistently rank Latvia among countries with a high level of judicial independence, while placing the Russian Federation among the lowest ranked globally, a country where in reality the courts operate under strong political influence, fair trial guarantees are weakened by vague laws, procedural limitations, and intimidation or prosecution of independent lawyers. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan. You have 3 minutes.
Mr. Vice President, it is quite revealing that the Indian delegation has chosen to react with fury and deflection to Pakistan's thematic submission during the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the freedom of religion or belief. It seems our remarks revealed an uncomfortable truth that this delegation would prefer not to face, or that our reflections on the report touch ground that they would rather leave undisturbed, unlike the centuries-old graves and shrines that they bulldoze. We reject Indian efforts to deflect from systemic issues by attacking Pakistan. When incidents of intolerance occur anywhere in the world, states' response is usually grounded in condemnation, protection, redress, and accountability. India's ruling elite, by contrast, is institutionalizing discrimination as state policy. The BJP RSS nexus promotes Hindutva ideology, systematically enacts discriminatory citizenship, anti-conversion, and cow slaughter laws, all of which target Muslims and other minorities. Worse, India's leaders directly assault the funeral rights of millions. BJP leaders at political rallies declare that Muslims, mothers and daughters, should be dug up from graves and more, with no consequences beyond cheers and landslide electoral wins. A senior MP declared that there should only be joint crematoriums for all, including those who practice burials. The Indian Prime Minister himself has publicly questioned why graveyards receive government funds. When such remarks come from the highest levels, they validate a politics that tells minorities that they do not belong, neither in life or in death. This is not an administrative failure, it is ideological engineering. It is not an aberration, but a consistent pattern witnessed under the current Indian dispensation. Mr. Vice President, the international legal normative trajectory on freedom of religion of belief is towards enhanced protection, effective guarantees, and an end to impunity. India, meanwhile, is actively weaponizing majoritarianism for political gain, with minorities living in fear and facing indignity even in death. We urge India to course correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other delegation wishing to exercise their right of reply? I see none. So, Excellencies, dear participants, this brings us to the end of this meeting. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. to continue this interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, and to hold the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on adequate housing. I hereby close the 15th meeting of the 61st session of the Human Rights Council. Thank you.